Have you ever been on an airplane when turbulence strikes, making you grip your seat with sweaty palms until the bumpy ride is over? Everyone that has flown more than 1 or 2 times has almost certainly experienced this. And if the ride is scary enough, we all wonder if the plane will fall apart, plunging us fatally to the ground. Come on, admit it. Sometimes you do get scared. Of all the tragic events that happen in our world, some of the most shocking and traumatic are airline crashes. Although far more people die in car accidents than in any other form of transportation, there is something so horrifying and unimaginable about plummeting from the sky and crashing into the earth, with no hope of survival. I think part of the horror is that as an airline passenger, you really have no control over your fate. You trust that the pilots, mechanics, and air traffic controllers are experts and will perform their jobs flawlessly. The vast majority of times they do. But even if they do a perfect job, unpredictable weather can develop with the power to knock a plane right out of the sky. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a woman that was a passenger on an ill-fated flight, where a poor decision sentenced everyone on board to an early death. Everyone, that is, except her. Was it fate or extraordinary luck? You can decide. Here is her story. Juliane Koepcke was just 14 years old when she and her German parents, biologists who worked at the Museum of Natural History in Lima, Peru, left the city and headed out to establish Panguana, a research station in the Amazon rainforest. Juliane stayed for several years in the remote station deep in the rainforest, and during that time became very familiar with survival techniques taught to her by her father. She was truly a girl that was comfortable living in the wild. Eventually, authorities required that Juliane return to an international school she had attended in Lima to take final examinations. She was 17 in December of 1971 when she returned with her mother Maria to her high school in Lima. After Juliane finished her exams, her mother said she wanted to return to the Panguana research station with Juliane on the 19th or 20th. But Juliane wanted to attend her graduation ceremony in Lima on the 23rd, and Maria agreed that they would stay. They scheduled a flight to return to Panguana on Christmas Eve day. Due to the holiday, it was difficult to find a flight, and almost all of the airplanes were completely booked. The only available flight was with a small Peruvian airline, LANSA. LANSA was a trouble-ridden airline with a number of previous operational infractions cited by the government. However, it was the only option, and despite her father's warnings, Juliane and her mother boarded LANSA Flight 508 on Christmas Eve. The flight left Lima around noon, heading to Pucallpa, Peru, after which they would return to Panguana. A total of 86 passengers boarded the plane, along with 6 crew members. After taking off, Flight 508 reached an altitude of about 21,000 feet when thunderstorms and severe turbulence occurred. There is speculation that the captain and flight crew decided to fly through the bad weather because of the pressure of tight holiday scheduling. While attempting to navigate the storm, the plane was directly struck by lightning and exploded, immediately disintegrating and plummeting from the sky. Juliane recalled her mother Maria's last words, which were, "That is the end. It's all over." Juliane, strapped into her seat, fell more than 10,000 feet into the Peruvian rainforest. Incredibly, she survived the fall, although she had multiple injuries including a broken collarbone, an eye injury, knee ligament damage, and gashes all over her body. Even with all of that, she was somehow able to walk. Unfortunately, the fall was not the end of her trauma. She was faced with the situation of being alone in the vast Amazon wilderness with no food, water, or medical supplies. Juliane spent the next 9 days trudging through the jungle looking for rescue. Her father's survival lessons must have been a significant factor in her eventually finding a hut that she used for shelter, where she was able to give herself basic first aid. At one point, before she could receive medical treatment, she poured gasoline on her wounds to kill maggots that had infested her cuts. Fishermen from a nearby village found Juliane and took her by boat to a village where she could be airlifted to a hospital. Wow, what an amazing story of unlikely survival. It seems that a combination of youth, wilderness experience, and random luck allowed Juliane to be the sole survivor of the tragic crash. But why did only Juliane survive? Well, there are those that speculate that the outer seats of her airplane row, which stayed intact, may have shielded her from a fatal injury. It's also theorized that a thunderstorm updraft may have slowed her fall. There was also thick foliage where the plane pieces landed, which could also partially explain why she was not killed when she struck the ground. After her rescue, Juliane helped guide emergency teams to the wreckage, but there were no other survivors. Sadly, when rescuers ultimately reached the crash site, they determined that 14 other passengers may have survived the initial impact, but then died from their injuries before assistance arrived. Her mother Maria's body was found on January 12th. Juliane's father's concern about LANSA Airline was apparently well-founded. Later, it was revealed that the airplane was largely built from spare parts of other planes. After Flight 508, LANSA went out of business permanently. In an odd twist to the story, famed director Werner Herzog was a scheduled passenger on Flight 508 that fateful day. He was scouting a location for a movie he was about to make, called Aguirre, Wrath of God. But due to a scheduling conflict, his plans were changed and he canceled the flight at the last minute. In 2000, he released a film titled Wings of Hope, which was about Juliane's experience on Flight 508. Herzog was inspired to make the film after he heard of her miraculous survival on a flight that he thankfully missed. In Wings of Hope, Herzog and Juliane visited the scene of the crash and also the places she traveled searching for rescue. In the movie, they take a flight from Lima to Pucallpa and sit in the same row of seats where she sat during the crash. They also find fragments of the plane and visit the village hut where she was ultimately found by the fishermen. One of the men appeared in the film to tell his perspective of the rescue. Juliane's trip with Herzog was somewhat cathartic for her, and perhaps helped put to rest the demons that undoubtedly stayed with her throughout the years. According to Juliane's autobiography titled When I Fell from the Sky, she suffered dreams and guilt since the crash, and in her own words said, quote, "I had nightmares for a long time, for years, and of course the grief about my mother's death and that of the other people came back again and again. The thought was, why was I the only survivor? Haunts me. It always will." Like her parents, she studied biology and ultimately earned a doctorate from the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich. She returned to Peru to conduct animal research, specializing in bats. Juliane published her doctoral thesis, Ecological Study of a Bat Colony in the Tropical Rainforest of Peru, in 1987. In 1989, she married Eric Diller, an entomologist specializing in parasitic wasps. Then in 2000, after the death of her father, she took over as director of the Panguana Research Station. I'm sure her mother would have approved.